I speak to you in the name of the living Lord, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Language is a funny thing. Sometimes we think we know exactly what something means, and we find out that we've actually missed the whole point. We're continuing in the Sermon on the Mount this week. Last week we had the Beatitudes, where we were challenged to look at the world a little bit differently, where things that are sometimes or often painful can actually be blessings in our life. There. Happy are we. Happy are we. And we continue now with these teachings about the law and the prophets, about this rigorous adherence to the law. And we get two stories about one with salt and one with light. And when I was reading the text for today, I have to say, I don't know if you ever get that, where you sort of get focused on one thing and everything else just falls by the wayside. And I never really quite got past the first line. You are salt of the earth. If salt loses its saltiness, it is useless. You are salt of the earth. And so I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive into this and look at it, how it affects our understanding of language, right? I think I know what salt is. I put salt on most of my food, and sometimes my doctor tells me that I'm not supposed to have as much salt. I don't know how many of you are in that situation, but salt makes almost everything taste better. And so salt is, a staple. It's not something that you cut out of your budget. You go there and you get like a pound for $1. Salt is not the most expensive thing on your grocery list, and it makes things taste great. But the problem is that in our world we have so much salt. We have so much salt, and a lot of that salt we don't even taste. Because I don't find, those dried soups taste even particularly salty, but some of them have enough salt for the whole day, let alone putting salt on your French fries or whatever else to make it taste delicious. So we live in a world where salt is ubiquitous, and salt is something that can be dangerous. It can be decadent, but it can also be life-saving. I don't know how many of you have done strenuous exercise and found that, I remember when I was doing my hiking in the summer, and there were heat advisories all the time. Every day I had to have my electrolyte tablets, which were basically just salts, right? Salts that tasted good so that you could retain some of that water because it was so hot that you got to dangerous levels of dehydration. So that would be, if I think of all the days of my life, the number of times where I really needed to take an electrolyte is a very minuscule amount. Most of the time, we have way too much salt. It is everywhere and it's dangerous. Yet in the ancient world, salt was prized because they, of course, don't have refrigerators or freezers. Salt is critical in preserving things. Salt is life. Salt is life. It still adds flavor, but it also preserves things so that you're able to eat things for longer and you're able to feed yourself. And so salt becomes incredibly valuable, and it's hard to get. They have, salt fields in the Mediterranean and in the Dead Sea where you evaporate the water and you get the salt. And eventually, in the Roman world, salt became the currency. They didn't have the gold standard. They had the salt standard, which is where we get the term salary, right? People got paid in salt. So when you read something like today, and you read something like, you are the salt of the earth, if it's lost its saltiness, it's useless, trampled underfoot. You think, when I think about salt, I think of more negative than positives. Yet when it was written, it was considered a full-on positive. And of course, our New Testament is written in Greek, Jesus probably spoke Aramaic as his regular language, and he probably knew ancient Hebrew, but we have almost no Aramaic or ancient Hebrew in our New Testament. It's all written in Greek, and there are a couple of words. Rabbi means my teacher, and we have that used a couple of times, and we have Talita Kam. We have a couple of sentences or phrases, but most of it is in Greek. So Jesus would have taught in Aramaic, and then it gets translated into Greek, and then it gets translated into Latin, and then it got translated into Old English, and then Elizabethan English, and then modern English. And now I think we have probably 1,000 translations, right, of how we can interpret the terms. My father, when I was growing up, he used to have this wonderful saying in French, and he said, "Traduire, c'est trahir." Translation is treason, right? And that might be a little bit extreme, but it's hard sometimes to get the heart of what was meant in an original language into a new language. And sometimes even when it's the same language, it's hard to communicate. At St. James, I don't know if you remember, there was a baptistry, a font, and on it had suffer the little children to come unto me, which is Elizabethan English. And I know that a little child came up to me and goes, "Why is Jesus suffering to have us around?" Right? I don't think it was Olivia, but it could have been Olivia. Anyway, but this idea that it says, suffer the children, and if you know Elizabethan English, you know that that's not what it meant. It meant welcome. Be patient. Allow the children to come among the congregation, to come among the group. They are not to be set aside and ignored and told to be quiet and whatnot. They're supposed to be welcomed in. But it says, suffer the little children to come unto me. And so it can be very confusing, and you can actually completely understand the opposite of what was intended in that text by reading it. And it is English, after all, but we speak a different language. And language changes sometimes really fast. Most of us here, I think Alana Rose might know, Olivia might know, I have heard of it, but I don't know because I'm old. What does 6-7 mean? I think the point of 6-7 is that it doesn't mean anything. But it's an insider word that sort of distinguishes those who are, under 18 or a little bit over 18, but you have to be pretty young to really understand the breadth of what 6-7 means. And so that is something that I think it was the word of the year last year, and it's probably going to be forgotten next year because things are so quick now. Things change all the time. So we think that we know what things mean. We think we know what we read, and it's like, it's simple. It's in black and white. It's in text, right? Yet, so often, there's a reason why we have 1,000 at least, I didn't count them, we have at least 1,000 English translations of the Bible. Because we are trying to interpret what this message is. And we get in trouble when we think we know all the answers rather than trying to figure out whether we've completely lost our way, whether we've completely lost the strain of it. And so before everyone gets, their glazed eyes and saying, I can't believe she's just spent a whole 10 minutes talking about salt and the language, but it is important that we recognize that sometimes we need to struggle with language and to allow ourselves to have our eyes opened. Isn't that what, Lori, you were saying? Well, actually, in the earlier service about, this poetic thing of being able to see and understand, not just observe, not just know something that's happening, but really see. We see that in the season of Epiphany with the idea of having our eyes opened, and we see something that's ordinary and we see that it's absolutely extraordinary. We allow ourselves to be surprised. And that's, I think, what we need to do in terms of struggling with how to make meaning in this world, whether it's when you're watching the news or seeing scary things that are happening in the States, whether you are scared or whether you're angry or whether you're just confused about what's happening, to take some time and to try to pull it apart and to reflect and struggle with what's happening, because so many things are not as simple as you may like to think they are, that they're more nuanced. And so we get a text like today that talks about this idea of becoming spicy, to becoming, salty. What do those mean? The salty means a little bit rude, a little bit obnoxious sometimes. Spicy means a little bit risque. But we're called to be passionate in a way. We are called to be salty. What's the point of having salt if it's not salty? And I know you might have a problem with that because the chemical characteristics of salt are always salt. And if it's not that particular mineral, then it's not salt. But look at it more poetically. What is it? How is it evocative? That if you have salt and it's not salty, what's the point of it? If you have light and you hide it, what's the point of it? Let alone the fire hazard of putting a candle under a wicker basket. But what is the point of having light if you don't shine? And don't think that I've come to tell you that you can do whatever you want to do. Jesus is telling us that God has created us so that we live with each other in a way that is loving and respectful and open, to valorize life, to make it blossom, to make it grow. My favorite passage is, that the law and the prophets is love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, all your mind. The second commandment is likened it, love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So Jesus isn't telling us that we can do whatever we want. He's telling us that we are living in this relationship with a God who created us out of love and who sustains us out of love and who redeems us out of love. We are called to be salty and bright. We are called to live fully in the moment, learning from the past, planning for the future, but living in the moment, so that we, in every generation, need to struggle to make sure that we understand where we come from and where we are and where we're going. So the message today from that wonderful teaching of Jesus, where our gospel writer takes and summarizes Jesus' teaching, we get these wonderful statements of living fully, being fully salty and fully bright, fully living into God's commandment to love God and love our neighbors. Because on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets, and Jesus has come to fulfill those laws, not to discard them. So I invite you to remain open. Doesn't mean that language can mean anything. It doesn't mean that we are completely free to interpret everything however we want. But things are never simply black and white. Things are never simply, that's what the text says. We have to enter into it and reinterpret it and redefine it for our own generations, because we don't have the same language as they did 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 or 5,000 years ago. We don't have the same understanding of the world, so we need to reinterpret it for ourselves. And sometimes it changes so fast that by next year we don't even know what 6-7 means. Those of you who do know, I don't really know, but I just know it's a thing. Anyway, language is complicated and nuanced, and I invite you to spend your life to live into that nuance and to get deeper into a relationship with a God who created and sustains you and redeems you out of love. Amen.